From the New Arts and Media Studios here in River West, the greatest neighborhood in the world, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, it's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. Hey, you know what? This is our anniversary show. It's our second anniversary. 2 years today. So, beginning of our third season here on The Log. Started as a weekly program. Well, you know what? It had a little development. It started as a weekly 1-hour show. And then we switched to a half-hour format when we produced Charles Purcell Presents, which was another half hour. So we split it into 2 half hours. The 1-hour program had radio theater and kind of experimental stuff and a lot of stream of consciousness monologues and things like that, and a lot of use of music and sound, in addition to the commentary on news, politics, culture, etc. So the idea of splitting into 2 half hours was that Charles Purcell Presents could be the more arty stuff, the radio theater, the sound sculpture, and it could have a more timeless quality. It could have a longer shelf life. And then we'd do a half hour of just straight commentary, and that's the timely stuff. That's the news of the day. That's, a shorter shelf life. So that's why we split it up into 2 half hours. And then one more evolution went from the weekly show to the daily show. Almost a year ago now. It was at the start of when COVID really hit the fan, mid-March of last year. So happy anniversary to us. Oh, before I forget, I just woke up in a cold sweat the other night. Just absolutely positive that I said combustible engine instead of combustion engine on a recent podcast. Did I do that? Did I? I even went back and hopped around. I listened. I didn't want to listen through whole shows just to find it, but I thought, oh no, did I do that? I was certain that I did, but I couldn't remember when, on what episode, or if it was just a bad dream. So, if I did say combustible engine instead of combustion engine, let me correct that right now. And yes, engines can indeed burst into flames, but that's not what I was talking about. I meant to say combustion engine. So there's that little correction just to cover my butt, because I was so embarrassed when I woke up in a cold sweat. I was just so embarrassed for that dumb mistake. And as I recalled, whether it was true or not, I did it more than once. This really was like waking up from a dream and trying to remember. Did I really say that? And as I'm remembering, yes, I'm sure I did. And I think I said it 2 or 3 times. And there's no taking it back. It's out there. Well, there is taking it back. In this particular world of podcasts, you can go back and you can make edits and you can repost it and you can change it because audio goes out into the world. I don't know. I guess that wouldn't change if somebody downloads it. That's now their file, right? It's not going to change anything. I don't know. I don't know how the tubes and wires work. Oh, that reminds me. I saw the most incredible headline suggesting that you turn off your camera when you're in a Zoom meeting. Unless it's absolutely necessary, just go audio only. Because the camera requires a lot of data, which requires somehow more electricity in the tubes and the wires of the internet. And so it's an environmental thing. It's better for the environment to not use your Zoom camera. This never occurred to me. Again, I'm the biggest dummy in the world when it comes to how all of this works. But it was a pretty convincing little argument. If you're constantly streaming and downloading and uploading, and this is your life now, as it is for a lot of us in the COVID era, and forget about COVID, it's just what we do now. We're constantly playing games and we're watching movies and all of this information going back and forth in every direction. takes energy, and apparently, I didn't know, some takes more energy than others. And the energy has to come from somewhere. So there's that. And it falls into that category of, no, one person isn't going to make a difference. But it's the whole voting analogy, and I don't have to get into that, right? All of us together as a big group, as a global community, thousands and millions of us doing this makes a really big impact. One person dropping out will make no impact, but a sizable amount of people dropping out would make a huge impact, right? It's just like voting. It's just like wearing masks and social distancing. If everybody had complied from the beginning, it would have just cut this thing to a tiny fraction of what we've had to endure. And yet, if everybody did comply, there could have been that one person out there who just said, oh, screw it. And they wouldn't have made a difference. But you have 2, you have 3, you have 10, you have 20, you have 1,000, you have 1,000,000, you have millions. Yeah, then it makes a difference. So if you want to rely on a moral system where you're the one person who gets to do whatever the hell they want, you have to count on every single other person playing by some rules. Yeah, that'll work. Speaking of COVID, there's always news every day, always developments. We don't talk about it too much on this program these days because, well, I don't know what I have to say, except what I've been saying from the very beginning. A serious, hardcore, top-down program of testing and tracing, mask mandates, social distance and gathering mandates, full-blown support for people unemployed, full-blown support for those who have to quarantine and isolate. We've been saying all these things from the beginning, and it didn't happen. It happened in some parts of the world, and we now have the proof. So we can just shout, I told you so from the rooftops, but, what satisfaction is there in that? Well, the latest big controversy here is whether or not to open up schools. And the Chicago teachers are threatening job action, and it's just a big old mess right now. And I think what I'd like to say is this. Everybody wants to claim that they're just following the science. That's the big stamp of approval now. If you can claim, yes, I'm following science, then that gives you a pass for your opinion. Well, I'm not going to claim to have any knowledge I don't have. Just as a layperson looking in, it appears to be that in this one area, there's lots of science. There are lots of different studies as to the age of kids and when they're better at transmitting and not so good at transmitting, their own safety and whether or not the odds are they're going to get it. There seems to be a consensus about the kind of atmosphere you need, how to be COVID safe, as they call it now. So that, from my reading, doesn't seem to be a big fight. But the science of kids and transmission is kind of dicey. So now we get into the politics of it. And the teachers' unions, of course, are working on behalf of the teachers. Whatever they do is in the interest of the teachers, and that's the way unions work, of course. They're just trying to protect their workers. And any teacher I've ever known loves and cares about their students, so they're worried about the students. Everybody should be worried about the parents and the grandparents. I mean, there's a reason this is so messy. Wanting kids back in school, the idea of wanting kids back in school is shared by everybody, right, left, and center. It's hard on the kids. They're not doing well, a lot of them. A pretty sizable fraction of them are just doing terrible. They don't even have internet access at home. I mean, this is really just a disaster for some kids. And even the most privileged kids with the nicest internet setups at home are still, they're losing it. You hear these stories. Lack of interest, depression. It's just terrible. So everybody agrees we want kids back in school. But here's this. It's just this really tough trade-off. And then it gets to the relief, the disaster aid that's coming. How much is going to go to schools? You got to get ventilation systems improved in a great number of schools. You got to get all the infrastructure and the equipment and the PPE manufactured and distributed. You got to get all the teachers vaccinated, which to me seems kind of crazy they should be right at the top of the line if you want to do this. I mean, I don't have small kids now, but I did. I did have small kids. And without getting into my story too much, I was the primary caregiver. I sort of arranged my life around the kids. I was a house husband / part-time this, part-time that, and so I know all about playing that role. And it was tough enough in the best of times. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. So it's hard for me to imagine what it would have been like 24/7 to have to supervise and coordinate all this homeschooling stuff. So I got sympathy for everybody in this story. But a theme that keeps resurfacing in this whole COVID experience we're having is that this country, our culture, our economy was never ever set up to work for most people. It's set up to work for those who can afford it. In this last jobs report, we saw this amazing, ridiculous headline. The U.S. economy lost 140,000 jobs in December. All of them were held by women. I remember seeing that and thinking, I just couldn't, what? How is that possible? I had to have read that wrong. There's got to be some headline editor who's trying to be cute, trying to be provocative. This can't be literally true. And yeah, it's true. We still live in a world where women are responsible for the great bulk of free labor, unpaid labor. We're long past the days when most women are able to stay out of the paid workforce and devote their lives to being a quote-unquote homemaker. Financially, every family needs both parents out working if they have two parents. And yet, around the house, it's still the woman doing the vast majority of the unpaid labor. How are we still here? So once again, this tragic, horrific COVID episode is tearing the Band-Aid off, revealing this great open wound in our society that so many have been blind to. But instead of learning a lesson, instead of thinking creatively and how we can somehow go about repairing this massive injustice, our solution is, well, we got to get these kids back in school. Even if the science isn't 100% convincing, we got to get the kids back in school for the economy. This has become the prime reason for many in this debate. We have to free up women to go back into the workforce because, God forbid, no company should lose any productivity. Plus, we got to keep those wages coming in so families can spend. Got to spend. Because consumption, as we all know, as we hear ad nauseum, consumers drive 70% of the economy. So for a lot of people, getting kids back in school, yeah, they want to pull out, oh, kids are suffering, and oh, they're sad, and oh, the education isn't working. All those things are true, but they don't really care about that. They just pull out those arguments, whatever they can throw at the wall and see what sticks. But their real, primary, sole concern, of course, is the economy. And it's keeping profits flowing. Because after all, that is America. That's how America is defined. We work, we get paid, we buy things, we work, we get paid, we buy things, then we die. And the schools have become central to this little hamster wheel. But then there are even more arguments. The schools also provide healthy food. Sometimes that's the only square meal a kid is getting. I'm not arguing against that point. Of course it's true. But doesn't that lead you to the next question? Why in the hell is that the case? Again, COVID reveals something that we should have all known in the first place, or at least it accentuates the point. It emphasizes the point that some kids are only getting nutrition because they're in school. So we're just learning this now because of COVID? Yeah, some of us are. But some of us have always known this, and many of us have just said, well, that's just the way the world works, I guess. So up until now, we've accepted that. And apparently we still accept it. The fact that a great number of parents can't feed their children. And our solution, open up the schools at great risk. Not see to it that these parents can provide nutrition to their children. We've pawned off every responsibility we have to the children of America, to the schools. You just do everything. You feed them, you provide all their social interaction, you provide counselors, school nurses, psychiatrists, teach them how to duck under a desk when there's a live shooter. I mean, and now you want teachers to take the added responsibility of enforcing social distancing, enforcing the masks, making sure that the cleanup effort is done on a continual basis. I mean, it's ridiculous what schools are asked to do. I taught in schools. I've been there. It's a pretty big job just in and of itself, just teaching the curriculum. It's a pretty big and important job. But policymakers have just relinquished all of their responsibilities and passed them all off to the schools. Every area of life for a kid in America now just has to be school-centered. And every mom and every dad has to be out there working, because that's the American way. You got to be out there contributing to the profits of your company, because that's America. In a better world, and there's absolutely no reason in the world we couldn't have it, a household could have one breadwinner and easily support a family with 2 or 3 or 4 kids, or even 5 or 6. Because back in the day, that was pretty common. That was very common. It wasn't everybody, but it was a great number. A majority of Americans had one person with a job out in the world, the other parent taking care of the kids, and just a regular job, a 9-to-5 kind of job. You come home, don't bring the job home with you. Again, this wasn't everybody, but this was a lot of damn people. Now, of course, in the old days, it was primarily almost 100% the man going out and the woman staying home. But where was that written in stone? If we had developed over the years with the advent of women's rights, etc., well, where we should have landed is a point where a family of 2 parents and 2 or 3 kids could still have just one parent out in the paid workforce. They could decide which one wants to go, or they could have each of them go part-time. So 40 hours a week could still support a family. That's really the point. I don't care who does it. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that women are still responsible for all the paid labor, hey guys, what the hell? What is your problem? How is that the case? Let's get on this, shall we? We're fighting over this damn $15 an hour now. We mentioned the other day, if the minimum wage had just kept up with the rises in productivity over the last couple of decades, the minimum wage right now would be $22.50. $22.50. That's the minimum wage. And minimum wage, of course, raises all wages, at least the lower and middle scale. And that's why corporations don't like it, because it eats into their profits. It doesn't cost jobs. That's a lie. That's a lie. No, but it does cut into their profits a little bit. That's all. So in a world where 40 hours pays a living wage, and a family can go out to a movie once in a while, or go out to a restaurant once in a while, or have a vacation occasionally, have a decent, safe car, all the kind of things that money can buy. No reason in the world we couldn't have that today. None. And the school doesn't have to be the center of everything for a kid. There's churches and community groups and rec centers and neighborhood friends. I mean, I don't want to rely on, a good old days argument. I'm very careful not to do that. But we can look at some models, and again, brought into our current age without the sexism, without the exploitation of women, there's no reason we can't have that world. Okay, take it back here. My mother volunteered for a couple different organizations. She was very active in the neighborhood. She would make meals for the old lady across the street, and everybody was always helping each other out. It was pretty great. My dad worked one of those 40-hour-a-week jobs for a decent wage, and he bought a house and he raised a whole bunch of kids. And we went on vacation occasionally. Nothing ever real fancy, but we'd go camping or we'd go, to visit relatives and spend the weekend and maybe go out to an amusement park or something. Nothing big, but we were fine. And he wasn't working 2 or 3 jobs. He wasn't working his ass off. No, he worked one regular 40-hour job, and he belonged to the VFW or the Elks Club or whatever. I was in the Boy Scouts and had piano lessons, and we had this whole life going on. All of us. I had a big family, kids, 2 parents. Everybody had a life going on. And we were extremely middle to lower middle class. I mean, nothing big, nothing fancy. But we had a house. My dad never bought a new car, but he bought a new used car every couple of years just to make sure that was working okay for everybody. Tell me why we can't have that today. There's no reason. It's been stolen from us. It's been stolen. And just to be very careful, just so you know that I'm aware of the problems of that age. Of course I'm aware of the racism, of the sexism, of course. But that life I've described translated into 2021, where the parents can decide which one's going to go out and work, or decide, well, I'll work 20, you work 20, or I'll work 30, you work 10. You can make those decisions in a world that works. And in a world that works, again, churches, social organizations, athletic clubs, just plain old friends in the neighborhood. So all of these responsibilities heaped onto schools to give the kids some sort of life, some sort of social life, some sort of support. The schools have this big responsibility because the parents have to go out and work their asses off, each of them for 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Now, this is something we should have seen coming. We should have headed off at the pass. And if we didn't, we should have done something about it long ago. And now we've got COVID shining this big old light on it, and still we don't see it. Still our answer is, we got to get the kids back in school. So, well, there's lots to talk about. I hadn't really planned on doing this big old rant on this today, but I did. Just so you know, I am aware there's quite a lot of news going on. The impeachment starts tomorrow, so let's give that the attention it's due. I go into it, I'll say this much, I go into it with, as would be expected, a fatalistic attitude. Really don't expect the votes needed. Is it 17 votes? Is that right? 17 Republicans would have to come over. So, highly unlikely. But I always go into something like this just keeping that sliver of hope alive. Well, things can happen. And from what I've been reading so far, the Democrats are going to put on a very strong prosecution. My one concern, though, and we'll see as the week develops, they're relying on a lot of video. It sounds like they're making a movie. It sounds like they're making this big multimedia production. There's going to be a lot of video compilations that I keep reading about. And so then the defense lawyers are countering that with their own videos. So it's going to be like a couple of public relations cases battling it out. And to the audience, in this case, the jury of senators who 99% of them have made up their mind, and to the audience at home, in other words, American citizens, to us at home, I'm afraid it's just going to look like another TV show. And there are villains and there are heroes, and we decide who we like. It's just this big, wrestling match. So I'm afraid that that's going to be the case. Now, one of the reasons we're even having the trial is A, because of what I said. You never know exactly what's going to happen. Maybe something huge will happen and we'll get the 67 votes we need. Or B, and probably really the real reason, just because it's the right thing to do. Congressional hearings, or in this case an impeachment, are often important just for the information they convey, just for the education they can provide. And since it is going to be a TV spectacular, well, yeah, okay, Democrats, do your best to teach America What really happened? Connect the dots. Show us the cause and effect. Put this into context. Give it the gravity that it deserves. And help us understand what really happened and why it happened. If the impeachment serves no other cause, well, that alone, it makes it more than worthwhile. And take that to the next level. This is for history. I really want 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years from now, I want people to have a clear understanding of what happened, what really happened. Because understanding history is important. And right now, Jamie Raskin and his team have been given the task of writing the first draft of history on this momentous event. And as much as these right-wingers want to deny that it was a momentous event, oh, well, just a bunch of people who went a little crazy and let's just move on and forget about it. No. It's undeniably a momentous event in American history, one with vital lessons to be learned, to be remembered. I've said it. I've heard other commentators say it. We had Pearl Harbor. We had 9/11. We had January 6th. I mean, this is huge, and it cannot be dismissed. Can't do it. And there's lots of blame to go around. We've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again. Literally decades of right-wing drift and lurching that took us to this inevitable conclusion of extreme right-wing violence. And this lurch to right-wing extremism laid the groundwork. It set the kindling. It poured the gasoline. But one man, one single man, lit the match. And that story must be told, and that man must be convicted and must be prohibited from ever running for any public office again. For the sake of our current politics and the devastating damage that he can continue to do right here, right now in our time, as well as for the sake of history, that future generations know the truth about what happened. This impeachment, regardless of its outcome, very, very important, and I will not have anyone dismiss it as a joke, as a show, as a circus. No. Not having that. All right, so that all starts tomorrow. I'll give you my thoughts as it goes along, especially if there's anything that needs to be said, other people aren't saying it. You know, that's kind of my lane. I'm always looking for, wait a minute, what did we miss? Did we miss anything? I'm the dog running around under the dinner table chairs, just lapping up what might have been missed, what fell through the cracks here. That's the way I see my role. And as time allows, I also want to go back, talk a little bit about the current state of the Republican Party and the right wing generally, and of course the whole Q craziness and all of that, just to toss out a couple of ideas that I think have been missed along the way, or a couple of ideas that I feel need to be amplified. So we'll do that too. All right, big week coming up here. Let's all take a big deep breath and we'll get through it together. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.